this bank, built this building, and then they insisted on making most of it a concert hall. It's an incredible idea.
I love the thought that Rachmaninoff was here. Horowitz, Toscanini, all that, but especially Rachmaninoff somehow, because I love his music.
The Troy Savings Bank Music Hall is one of the most acoustically perfect music halls in the world.
Exactly that space or that volume is just about right. And that is amazing.
Renaissance 150 celebrates the 150th anniversary of the Troy Savings Bank building. As a part of that, we've engaged in this massive capital project, which is transformational for our organization.
Located in Albany, New York, the American Institute of Architects, New York State, is the voice of the architectural community and a resource for its members in service to society. For more information, aianys.org.
Architecture Plus, an architectural firm specializing in education, healthcare, and community projects like the Troy Savings Bank Music Hall, serving local New York State communities for over 40 years. More information available at aplususa.com. What does retirement mean to you? Travel? Time with your family? Serving the community? Fagan Associates has been providing financial planning, wealth management, and investment advice for over 30 years to the Capital Region. Located in Troy, New York.
The Troy Savings Bank Charitable Foundation is the community legacy of the former Troy Savings Bank. A proud supporter of Troy Savings Bank Music Hall, the Troy Savings Bank Charitable Foundation is committed to building stronger, healthier, and more vibrant communities.
Troy, post-Civil War, we were a bustling city. We had about 70,000 people. The collar and cuff manufacturing was going full tilt. Ironworks were going down in South Troy. I mean, you had trains coming into the city. That's how busy it was. About every 15 minutes, there was a train either coming or going out of the city of Troy. There was always this very sophisticated taste for entertainment, even beginning all the way back when the Troy Museum had the very first production of Uncle Tom's Cabin took place in Troy. So there was always a real push for very sophisticated entertainment at the time. The Troy Savings Bank has such an interesting history. They go back to 1823, and they were originally located on First Street in what is known as the Athenaeum Building. And from the very beginning, they also were very much involved with the community. This idea of having a savings bank, a people's bank. They would have spaces within the bank or that the bank owned and they lent out, like the Mental and Moral Improvement Society. They would have these amazing art shows that were there, bringing in Hudson River Valley artists and European sculpture. Again, it's very early on in the 1820s and 30s. There is a high level of sophistication for entertainment, and the bank is right there at the forefront of it.
Around 1870, the bank had grown so much that they decided they needed a new headquarters building. And they thought it would be wonderful as a gift to the city to put this beautiful concert hall on top of their business. And so that became their contribution to the cultural life of Troy at the time.
I think people were very civic-minded. You know, Troy was a cultural center then, as it is now, and they wanted to contribute to that. They had the money to build something fabulous, and they did.
So they bought 4 properties on the corner of 2nd and State Street and started the process of hiring an architect.
The architect was chosen as a result of an architectural competition. There were 5 firms that were invited to submit drawings. The winner of that competition was George B. Post. He was, at the time, only 33 years old when he designed this. He probably had an advantage in that he could meet the bank's budget. But he also had another really important advantage, which was that he was already in Troy, although he was a New York City architect, working on the hall building at exactly the same time as the competition.
This was a 5-year, $500,000 project, finished in 1875. And it just changed the whole street. I mean, you have this, these wonderful brownstones and, of course, the Hart Cluett House and the castle. And then now you've got this enormous Beaux Arts building. We had in Troy many other smaller theaters and halls, but the Troy Savings Bank Music Hall, this was a showpiece, for sure. The building looks so huge when you look at it from the outside, but when you're in the space, it is intimate.
I have a lot of friends who come through, or family come through and come to the hall, and they're invariably mesmerized by the physicality of the hall. I must say, the thing that I love the most is seeing the famous composers' names on the ceiling and then on the doors of all the boxes.
The opening night concert was on April 19th, 1875. It must have been awe-inspiring to all who came, and I know it was a big point of pride for the bank.
And Theodore Thomas, of course, was a German-born conductor who really became the kind of preeminent American conductor of that era. He was invited to Chicago, I think in the 1890s, and became the founder of the Chicago Symphony. So a really important figure, and the fact that he was there with his orchestra, the Thomas Orchestra, to open the hall suggests that Troy at that time really was a major industrial center and a very, very wealthy town. I came to the Capital Region from Los Angeles, California, where I actually was born and raised, and then I went off to college and came back to be the assistant of the Philharmonic there. And so I was used to new venues and lots of multi-purpose venues. And when I came to the Capital Region and saw Albany and Troy and Saratoga and all the related towns, I was so struck by the richness of the history of the place, and nowhere more so than when I first stepped into the hall, in that it just breathes history.
It's been a remarkable who's who of 19th, 20th, and 21st century artists who've played on the stage. Sergei Rachmaninoff, Vladimir Horowitz, Yehudi Menuhin, Jascha Heifetz, Fritz Reiner. It's just amazing. Benny Goodman, Ella Fitzgerald, Diana Krall, Dave Brubeck.
There is a beautiful mural, and on the bottom of the mural has all the different musicians that played there.
Many of whom were presented by Troy Chromatic Concerts.
The Troy Chromatics organization, which this was a subscription music series, is still going on today. Their first ones were in 1894, and they would bring in orchestras and performers from around the world.
Sometimes your favorite concert is just something that is sort of going to be a once-in-a-lifetime experience. And one was hearing the Kirov Orchestra with Gergiev conducting in the hall. It turned out that they were playing in Carnegie Hall, and so this would be, in a sense, a full rehearsal concert for them. They arrived sort of midday, and they spent the entire afternoon. Gergiev put them through an entire afternoon of rehearsals. And then there was a break, and then the evening concert. But it was phenomenal. It was an absolutely phenomenal concert.
I went to a Stephen Isserlis recital, just cello and piano, earlier this season. He, I think, is one of the greatest cellists in the world, and certainly one of the most expressive and aware stylists in the world of string playing.
I love the thought that Rachmaninoff was here. Horowitz, Toscanini, all that, but especially Rachmaninoff somehow, because I love his music. And the thought that he was here, and the thought you're sitting in a dressing room, Rachmaninoff sat there, probably scowling at the mirror and sort of growling when they called him to go on stage. I love that thought. following in his footsteps, which is a dream come true.
You know, you hear about all the artists, performers who have played there in the past 150 years. I think I was just kind of overwhelmed both by the physical beauty of the hall, and then of course when I had the great privilege of performing in the hall, I had never experienced an acoustic even remotely like that. And I had conducted regularly at Carnegie Hall for the first I think 6 years of my career. I was the conductor of the New York Youth Symphony, so that's one of the other great halls of America. But I wasn't ready for the incredible immediacy of the sound in the Troy Music Hall. Rachmaninoff, of course, played there many times. The great conductor of the Cleveland Orchestra, George Zell, in the 50s and 60s, he insisted whenever the Cleveland Orchestra made a tour of the eastern United States that they play in the Troy Music Hall because he wanted the Cleveland Orchestra musicians, arguably the greatest musicians in America, to experience the beauty, the acoustical beauty of the hall. Metropolis, the great conductor of the New York Philharmonic, said he'd play there for free because he just was so impressed by the sound of it. Everyone was just overwhelmed by the uniqueness of the sound of the music hall. The relationship the Albany Symphony has to the Troy Music Hall is that we play at least half and sometimes more than half of our annual subscription concerts in the hall, and have done so for the past, well, many, many decades. Long before I came, the orchestra was already playing in the hall, and it's one of the great things about the Albany Symphony that you can hear us in that legendary space.
I always have the sense when I walk into this hall that I've walked 100 years back into time. I've stepped into a time warp. But the acoustic is absolutely as remarkable as everyone says it is. I have the sense when I'm conducting sometimes that you can actually feel the wind blowing in your hair as the sound shoots out.
Very little has changed. There was some roof work done, and there's been some ceiling work done. The ceiling was much more ornate.
And it's interesting, when it was completed in 1875, some of the earlier articles that were written in the paper, they went, oh, it's a beautiful hall, it's amazing, but the acoustics are a little, eh.
I think the biggest change that's visible to the public is a new cove that was put over the stage when we purchased the pipe organ in 1890.
And some people think that because of the way the organ was built and the way the pipes are, that somehow it makes this music, the sound, carry through the stage. So after that, you start seeing the reviews in the newspapers about the amazing acoustics.
The Troy Savings Bank purchased the organ from a gentleman in Manhattan. It was actually installed in his apartment townhouse. I don't know about you, but I cannot fit an organ in my townhouse. The Odell organ is one of, between 13, 15, somewhere around there, Odell organs from the 19th century in the country. The organ since 2006 has been in a partial state of performance readiness. The National Organ Society at that time had provided us a grant to actually repair the organ with the money that they could provide to make it at least somewhat playable. My understanding is that it was near not playable for quite some time since the mid-'80s.
The organ today is in need of some work. We're hoping to do that at some point. It's not in our scope right now, but it is sort of functional, but it is not in concert condition.
It will require a restoration. That is that icing on the cake that we need to make of this hall just phenomenal. I came here about 11 years ago for an interview and audition with Albany Pro Musica, and a board member took me to see the hall. I was first impressed with the beauty of the hall. When I entered, I thought I was in Vienna. The next thing that I did was to play the piano a little bit. And then, of course, I could witness the kind of resonance, the acoustics that the hall has. And my first reaction at the time was, why are we not performing here all the time? And that is precisely what followed. Albany Pro Musica is the chorus in residence at the Troy Savings Bank Music Hall. As an organist, I am biased when I say that part of the beauty of that hall is the beauty of the organ facade. It is said that for the organ, the best stop, which is what you pull for the sound, is the acoustics. A good organ will not sound great in a poor acoustic. The human voice is very similar to the organ. In the pipe organ, the sound comes through the wind in those pipes. Our voices, of course, sustained by the air that we breathe. The acoustics of the hall makes a huge difference and makes our sound really elegant and spectacular. There are certain things that I remember, of course. One is the Bach B minor Mass. I never forget the faces of the instrumentalists. You see, we brought instrumentalists from Handel and Haydn Society in Boston. This is some of the best musicians in the nation. They're used to playing great places. And I remember their faces when they first started playing at the hall. There was one of them who was there like a little boy, just observing, almost trying to see the sound. It's not just a building. It is a witness to all this music, and it is such a privilege to be part of that history, of that journey.
Before 1900, the science of concert hall acoustics was not yet established.
Ning is a wonderful man and a very knowledgeable acoustician who teaches at RPI, and he brings his class down at least once a year, and they take measurements and do experiments in the hall.
We are measuring the sound characteristics of the music hall. And the way that we're choosing to do it right now is by using a pink log sweep. So what it does essentially is it covers from the lowest frequencies all the way to the highest ones that we're interested in. So it blasts that into the room, and then we use 4 microphones to measure the response of the room in a specific seat, and we're measuring a whole bunch of different seats.
We always say the Boston Symphony Hall was built according to learned theory. So 1875, the Troy Music Hall was not that case. There was no actually systematic knowledge to guide us to build. And it happened like that. So the architects say, hey, we'll build like this. So the important aspect of the Troy Music Hall is so-called shoebox shape, a rectangular enclosure exactly that space or that volume is just about right. And that is amazing.
One of the things that Troy Bank is really well known for is that it has like the sweet spot of reverberation time. So it's about how much the sound like stays in the room, the sound energy stays in the room. It's about like a 2-second period of time for the sound to die, which means that the blend for musical performance of all of the instruments is really good. So far from being in here, it seems like there's fairly good clarity of speech, which is another one that's really hard to hit when you also have really good reverb time.
After Troy Music Hall, maybe Carnegie Hall in New York City, and also a couple of years later in Boston Symphony Hall. And these three halls are very profound start in US. And if you want to trace the history, maybe you find some old halls, but they're not comparable to halls like these three halls.
I always say it's one of the 4 or 5 best acoustical spaces in America, but I think it may actually be the best. I brought you a quote because I thought you should know this. You may have already seen it, but here's the quote. It's a newspaper quote. "Every musician who has ever played there claims the music hall is the best acoustic installation in America and possibly the world." And that's Harold Schoenberg writing in the New York Times in 1971 at a time when they were thinking of pulling down the Troy Music Hall.
The music hall, like many things, particularly in the 1960s, that was a time of urban renewal. It was a time we were really trying to reinvent ourselves. You've got these 19th century cities that things were sometimes looking a little dingy. One of the earlier bank presidents wanted to take that beautiful vaulted roof off and put a square roof and put a restaurant or something up there. I mean, I think I was always trying ways to, make the building work. There was enough outcry from the city and from the people who support the music hall that they squelched any of those ideas.
When Dan Hogarty became president of the Troy Savings Bank, he really appreciated the intention that the bank had at that time of creating and providing this beautiful hall to the community. And I think it was his dedication to preserving that has allowed us to continue to operate.
Someday somebody else would want to own the Troy Savings Bank, which I had to, incorporate into my thinking. The successor, the acquirer, they may not have the same interest in the music hall that I did.
When it came time for the bank to go public, Dan made the decision to create a condominium structure for the building, separating the music hall from the banking portion.
So that if someone acquired the bank, they get the bank building, but they don't get the music hall.
And I think in many ways, he was most responsible for ensuring that it lives today. Renaissance 150 celebrates the 150th anniversary of the Troy Savings Bank building. As a part of that, we've engaged in this massive capital project to introduce air conditioning into the music hall, which we'd never had before. It will allow us to operate year-round, which is transformational for our organization. We've taken great care so that you really won't notice. It's running right now, and I can't hear it, and you can't hear it, so it seems to be quite successful.
As a part of celebrating 150 years and looking for 150 more in the future, we're reactivating the first floor of our building, the former Troy Savings Bank. That new space will be titled the Capital Region Music Hub. It will be a secondary performance space. There will also be classrooms and spaces where folks can connect, can gather, and can learn.
It's been quite a road that we've been down. It's been an extremely challenging road from an engineering and construction standpoint, but we have a terrific team that has worked on this, and we're so thankful to them. This opening it just means the world to everyone.
When you preserve a space like this, you're making a huge statement. And when you bring new generations to be part of performances there, the impact is enormous.
The Savings Bank built a building that was much larger than what they needed, but it had a very important civic function. So it's important to make this available to future generations.
I've been in every possible kind of venue and acoustical space, but when I come home to the Troy Music Hall, I remember how fortunate we are here in the Capital Region to have one of the greatest acoustical venues in the world.
For a city that's really a small city, to have something like the Troy Savings Bank Music Hall here it's a national treasure, and we're proud to have it here.
Located in Albany, New York, the American Institute of Architects, New York State, is the voice of the architectural community and a resource for its members in service to society. For more information, aianys.org.
Architecture Plus, an architectural firm with over 40 years of experience in designing mental and behavioral health facilities across North America. More information is available at aplususa.com. What does retirement mean to you? Travel? Time with your family? Serving the community? Fagan Associates has been providing financial planning, wealth management, and investment advice for over 30 years to the Capital Region. Located in Troy, New York.
The Troy Savings Bank Charitable Foundation is the community legacy of the former Troy Savings Bank. A proud supporter of Troy Savings Bank Music Hall, the Troy Savings Bank Charitable Foundation is committed to building stronger, healthier, and more vibrant communities.